Around the world, more and more countries are debating whether 16-year-olds should have the right to vote. Some say it empowers the youth. Others argue they're too young. Well, today we're asking, could 16 be the new 18? And what will this mean for democracy? I'm Stefanie Dekker, and this is The Stream.
Why are we letting 16-year-olds vote?
16 is a fantastic age to vote.
Put a finger down if at 16 and 17 you could leave home, pay national insurance, get a job, be an adult carer, and vote.
We are the future and we deserve to have a say in how current issues such as employment, healthcare, education, the climate crisis and so many others are being dealt with, because we are the ones that are going to have to deal with the consequences.
For the first time in UK history, 16-year-olds will be able to vote. And I'm not just talking about Instagram polls, they're going to have a say in their general election. Well, it's a movement that is gaining momentum. Many 16-year-olds feel the decisions being made now will shape their entire futures, but they don't have a seat at the table. Well, to discuss all of this and having a seat at our table at the stream is Cameron Holt, Youth MP for Bassetlaw in the UK. And we have Thomas Brochure, co-founder of Make It 16. He is in Christchurch in New Zealand. And joining us a little later in the show is Nuurrianti Jalli. She's a researcher at Oklahoma State University. Cameron, I want to start with you. You got the vote in the UK. What does your generation bring to the table?
Thank you very much for having me on today. Well, you're absolutely right that we now have the vote in the UK. And although this is the first step, it is not the full journey. I believe there's lots more to do. And it means a lot to my generation. It's something that has been campaigned for a long time. And it's something that people have believed in for a long time too. And now that the UK has taken this very historic and very interesting step, it means that young people can now start to get involved in things they always have wanted to. These decisions in politics have affected young people forever, for many centuries. And it's now very exciting that young people can finally have their say and actually have their opinions heard in a way that materialises into action. It's no longer just empty words from young people. It means that they can go down to the polling station and they can select the candidate that they feel will make the best change for them. And that, I believe, can only be positive.
Well, some people online are having concerns on how lowering the voting age will affect students.
People think that 16 and 17-year-olds have a lack of cognitive maturity and informed judgment. So classroom conversations will likely become more politicised if 16 and 17-year-olds can vote. And that seems to be a good thing because people are becoming more politically aware. They know who's running the country. But that might just lead to bullying. It might lead to peer pressure, people getting picked on because they're voting a certain party or not voting a certain party.
Now, Thomas, you're fighting for the same right in New Zealand, the right for 16-year-olds to vote. What do you say to those that 16 is too young?
I think we have to look at the facts here. In 2025, the world is politicized. We're too young to see Tuvalu be forced underwater by inaction on climate change. We're too young to see net core crown debt in New Zealand rise to 200% of GDP by 2065. Unfortunately, that's the reality. We're too young to face a youth mental health crisis where New Zealand has one of the worst in the OECD, where materially 617 New Zealanders every year kill ourselves because we have not been supported from youth by a system that has failed us. This has been a system that is not catered towards youth. And why should we be punished for not being able to adequately fit into that system, right? It's a very common sense policy here. I also reject the notion that more classroom discussions will be politicized because this is just the state of the world right now. We can continue to bury our heads in the sand and ignore what's happening outside, but we have to wake up to the reality here.
Well, you mentioned a few things there that I was going to ask you about later, things that seem to be important to you, climate change, the economy. We are going to get back to that. But the voting age debate usually focuses on the young. But what about the other end of the age spectrum? Listen to this.
I'm sorry, but if you have a problem with 16 to 18-year-olds voting, you better have a problem with anyone 80 plus voting. No more voting for them. Because let's be frank, you should be statistically likely to see the impact of your vote. So let's just keep the same energy. And this idea that 16 to 18-year-olds are any more stupid or susceptible to political propaganda is absolutely ridiculous. Stupidity is not age exclusive. There are idiots of all ages, I promise you.
Cameron, I'm going to ask you something also on the other end of the age spectrum. We're talking about debating 16-year-olds voting. What about, do you think there should be a cap on the age of leaders? We have leaders in the world, presidents that are in their 70s, in their 80s. How do you feel about that one?
That's actually a very interesting question, not one I've been asked before. No, personally, I don't believe in an age cap precisely for what I believe is right for young people too. I believe it would be contradictory to have to say that young people can vote, but then not allow older people to do the same. So I believe that the best person, regardless of their age, regardless of their sex, regardless of their class, regardless of all those characteristics, should get the vote and should be allowed to lead their parties. That is what I believe in politics, in believing in having the best person, regardless of demographic, lead that role. And that is why I believe politics is moving, hopefully, and we are hopefully going in the right direction where younger people, people with different knowledges, whether that person be 16 or whether they be 80, if they are truly the best person for the job, they are with the times, they know what's going on, and they understand what people are being affected by in their lives. And I believe that they should go forward and they should lead their party. And I believe it would be wrong and unjust to say that a 90-year-old shouldn't be a leader, although there may be few 90-year-olds that are up to that job. If there is one, and if they can represent all people across all ages, then by all means, I would support that.
That's a very excellent and very political, balanced answer there. It definitely has a future in politics, Cameron. Thomas, what would you say? Something jumped out at me in your pre-interview where you said, I thought this was very interesting. You said in year 9, you stood up and you debated that 16-year-olds should not have the right, I am going to call you out on this, should not have the right to vote. What were your arguments then and what made you change your mind?
Yeah, thanks for that. The interesting thing about that speech is that my points were so bad, I actually had to fake a statistic to prove the point that 16 and 17-year-olds should be disenfranchised. I mean, this is the level of logic we're dealing with here. Because my arguments particularly centered around this idea of maturity, which I know was mentioned in one of the videos that was shown up. But this idea on maturity comes from stereotypes around 16 and 17-year-olds, which you can just as easily apply to any other age group depending on how it suits your political agenda. Because I hear the argument around maturity enough that 16 and 17-year-olds are immature, so we shouldn't be trusted with a vote. Actually, this is just anti-scientific because decision-making and maturity comes down to two main sectors, cold cognition and hot cognition. Now, hot cognition is the in-the-moment, emotionally charged decision-making, things like drinking and gambling. And there are good reasons why we have ages at 18 and 20, respectively, in New Zealand for that. Because fundamentally, 16 and 17-year-olds don't have the brain development to be able to handle these types of decisions. Importantly, unless you've had a very, very bad day, no one's going to go into a voting booth drunk. You're going to have time to research, to understand different perspectives, to weigh up decisions and get involved in all the electoral buzz that helps shape your decision-making. This is what's called a cold decision, and that is why we have so many other ages set at 16. Some were mentioned earlier, but also includes things like informed medical consent, standing trial in court, moving out of home, leaving school, working full-time, paying income tax. I'm running out of fingers here because in New Zealand, we recognize, and in the world, frankly, we recognize the fact that 16 and 17-year-olds do have the cold cognition ability to be able to execute these decisions. Voting is exactly the same. So when you dispel the arguments about maturity and you clear your mind of the stereotypes, having a voting age at 16 is not just adequate, but it's scientifically valid.
Okay, so to be devil's advocate, both of you extremely politically aware, extremely good speakers. Not every, and no disrespect to 16-year-olds, but not every 16-year-old is as eloquent, as politically savvy, as politically interested as you guys. So how would you, Cameron, take this one? How would you respond to that? Like, you guys do have a very political, strong grasp, but not everybody does.
Thank you. Thomas raised a brilliant point there that I don't think it's down to a level of maturity. And in the video you showed earlier, I love the quote that said that there are idiots across all ages. I don't think it's an issue that some 16-year-olds aren't informed on politics because there are so many adults up and down the country that, in my view, aren't informed on politics too. And that is the nature of politics. Regardless of what side you're on, there will always be people that you yourself deem uninformed, and no doubt that person will deem you uninformed. So I don't think you can categorize people as being uneducated in politics because of their age. That can be aided and helped by political education in schools, and at our age, that is the perfect time to do that. Whatever country this young person lives in, we can implement political education which is neutral, doesn't teach them or indoctrinate them about which side to be on, but rather how politics works and how important it is. And that will hopefully lead to generations going forward that are more informed. I found it interesting about Thomas's early opposition to votes at 16. I have at times been frightened, frankly, by some peers that I know that are my age that will then get to go and vote in the next general election. And I think that's the important thing here. People often say about the notion that young people will all go and vote for the same party, that they're all on the left of politics, that they all support the same ideas. From my experience and in my circles, and I believe in UK society, that is certainly not true. There's so many people that are my age that disagree with me on literally absolutely everything. And that, I think, is important, that I don't believe that by lowering the voting age, it will mean that one particular party will succeed. I think that the opinions of young people will be split, and there will be young people in very different camps and with very different ideas. And going forward, that will only diversify the opinions at the table and make politics a better place all round.
Because there was, of course, a debate in the UK saying that the youth vote would benefit the Labour Party, right? So people do have different opinions regardless of their age. Thomas, question to you. You alluded to that a little earlier. What is important to you? What are the issues that you feel that you should have a right to have a say in at this point?
Yeah, so honestly, I look around the world and I am deeply troubled. And if you're not troubled, well, then I think you need to reassess your eyes because, hey, we're looking at facts here. In New Zealand's economy, for example, as I mentioned earlier, currently a Treasury forecast released today suggests that net core crown debt could rise to 200% of GDP by 2065 at current policy settings. These are policy settings set by people who won't have to deal with the consequences of their actions. That's $400 billion, which for a little country like New Zealand is a lot of money to pay for the government's reckless spending. I also think about, obviously, the youth mental health crisis, and it's not just 116 suicides. That's very easy to say as a statistic. But when you consider the number of lives that you affect there, the number of stories to tell, I've had people in my life who have been very personally affected by suicide, and that starts at the roots in your adolescence. When we have a system that doesn't cater towards them, that does lead to these negative social harms, which are so prevalent in society. And then obviously I look at Tuvalu, who's the grandchildren of today's Tuvalu residents won't necessarily be able to have that same connection to their homeland as I hope my grandchildren will have to mine. And regardless of whether or not you agree with me on any of these issues, like anyone listening could listen to that and think he's talking a load of, I don't agree with anything he said there. But at the end of the day, what's undeniable is that I'm going to be dealing with these consequences more than anyone else above my age group. It's the same thing for every single 16 and 17-year-olds. We are the deepest stakeholders of the future, whether you like it or not. And if you purport to stand for a representative democracy, you cannot simultaneously uphold a democracy that does not represent its constituents, and particularly the most deeply affected constituents. And that is what is important to me. Democracy is not a perfect system. It never will be. But we have a moral obligation to make it as strong as possible to ensure that we have a government that adequately represents the needs and interests of our citizens. And that is at the heart of my movement.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to broaden this discussion now. We're going to bring in Nuurrianti Jalli. She's a researcher at Oklahoma State University, and she's going to talk about the role of social media in all of this. Now, before we go to her, one dilemma many are talking about is how to attract attention from teenagers online. It's a tricky one, especially with the amount of misinformation out there.
Okay, but why is nobody talking about how social media algorithms fundamentally change the way politicians talk to us? Until the 2010s, you see, almost all political communication happened through what we call the broadcast model. One person talking to a lot of people. Think about FDR doing his fireside chats where he could just count on everybody to turn on their radios and listen to him yap. But now people don't use the radio anymore. They use social media where they receive their information algorithmically. This algorithmic model of communication initially receives a much smaller audience, and that's because it depends on virality. To reach as many people as FDR did, you first have to get lots of shares and interactions so that the algorithm will push your message further. But the problem with that is that more extreme opinions are going to perform better online. Marjorie Taylor Greene and AOC are both better at going viral than my Congressman Paul Tonko because they both hold more extreme beliefs that are more likely to generate engagement. And studies show that politicians in general are engaging in greater online incivility because they know that civil-friendly content is less good for going viral. This not only normalizes polarized rhetoric, but directly incentivizes dangerous behaviors like exaggeration and misinformation. If a politician makes crazy claims about the other side, that's not only better for gaining engagement among your own side, but also any attempts to correct the misinformation will count as further interactions for the algorithm.
Nuurrianti, are politicians getting aware of the potential of the youth, and are they amending their PR campaigns, their election campaigns to social media to tap into this?
Yes, thank you so much again for having me. And I'm going to share with you perspective from Southeast Asia because my research is focusing on Southeast Asia. Empirical studies show that Southeast Asia, social media has become that main arena for political campaigning. Say, for example, in Indonesia, 2019 and 2024 elections, more than 60% of the electorate reported social media as their primary source of political information. And politicians politicians adapt accordingly, investing a lot in TikTok campaign, YouTube campaign, and WhatsApp campaign, often at the expense of traditional town halls or long-form policy communication. And the drive to capture virality encourage simplified emotional content. And research from the Philippines, say, for example, as we talk about misinformation just now, found that false and misleading posts, particularly tied to emotional content and nostalgia, circulated far higher than corrections, with fact checkers often unable to catch up. So we have a lot of what we call it in Southeast Asia, fact-checking agencies that monitoring political content during the election, and they found thousands of pieces of problematic content during these campaign periods.
I mean, it is a huge issue. We did a show just recently on misinformation and disinformation. One of the arguments against having the vote given to 16-year-olds is that they are more susceptible to disinformation and misinformation. They don't have the experience to say, well, this could be altered, this could be something that isn't true. How do you see it, Nuurrianti, in your research? Do you feel that someone at 16 isn't as equipped to deal with the amount of misinformation out there?
The research is more nuanced than a simple yes or no. Young people in Southeast Asia, say, for example, are indeed highly exposed to misinformation because of their reliance on social media platforms. But one thing that I really want to put out there is that exposure is not the same as susceptibility. And studies from Indonesia and Malaysia suggest that youth often demonstrate like higher digital literacy skills and more skeptic than older groups, particularly when it comes to identifying memes or manipulated images. By contrast, say, for example, research in the US and replicated in the Philippines has shown that older adults, especially those active on Facebook and WhatsApp, are more likely to share false content. This is linked not to malice, however, but to lower familiarity with verification practices and higher trust in messages received through family and social networks. So I think we should avoid assuming that misinformation is a youth problem. Different groups face different vulnerabilities. Younger people are more influenced by peer networks and influencers, while older people fall prey to chain messages and political rumors. Addressing, again, this requires tailored strategies for each group rather than treating susceptibility as age-specific issue.
That's quite funny because we were discussing this with our team before doing this show, and we were joking about, messages that we sometimes in forwards receive from our parents that we have to tell them, no, this is not right. This is,
Right.
So media literacy and digital literacy does, of course, play a huge role in that. Cameron, that brings me to you. I wanted to ask you that, how would you respond to that, to those to say that you are too young to be able to tell the difference online? Of course, we're generalizing hugely, right? Among the youth, people are very different, but how would you respond to that?
I echo everything that's already been said. I totally agree that young people do in general use social media more than the older generation. I, for one, I'm an example of that. I do use my fair share of social media.
Can I actually jump in and ask you, do you watch television news?
I do watch television news, yes, but I think I'm one of the few in my generation that does, mainly because I'm interested in politics myself. But I think most young people get the vast majority of their news elsewhere from television and newspapers nowadays. I think it's more from social media. But I would trust a young person with social media a lot more than I would trust an adult with social media. I think, as just been said, young people know how to use social media far more than an adult does. And I think adults are on social media in many cases just as much as young people. There are many 30, 40-year-olds that are on TikTok for 8 hours a day. That does happen and is very common in many societies across the world. But I think young people are getting better at recognizing what is AI, at recognizing what is fake news. But that doesn't take away the issue. But this issue is not down to age. Rather, this is an issue that needs to play a core role across all of politics. In the UK, for example, last year in July, August time, we saw riots all across the UK in lots of different cities and communities to do with immigration. Lots of that was fueled by misinformation rather than genuine and factual concern. That, to me, is a major issue. And lots of the people that were part of those riots were not young people, they were adults that were foul to the misinformation online. So I believe rather than classifying this issue as one of age, we need to tackle it head on and recognise that, yes, misinformation does exist and it causes issues in both society and politics. but we shouldn't categorize young people for being the ones that are playing part of that. Rather, it's all people that use social media, and young people actually can recognize the signs better and can hopefully make better use of social media.
It is, of course, a general issue trying to decipher the huge amount of misinformation, what's true and what isn't online. Now, the UK is not the first country to implement a 16 voting age. Dr. Christine Hubner is an academic who's done research on political engagement. And here she shares some of her findings from countries that have adapted this change.
For example, in Brazil, other Latin American countries, but also in Austria and then parts of the United Kingdom, Belgium and Germany. So we do have a good evidence base of what happens when 16 and 17-year-olds join the electorate. And some of the findings are fairly consistent across all of these countries. The first one is that we don't see any major changes to election outcomes. In most countries, 16 and 17-year-olds make up a very small part of the population. You can imagine between 3 and 5% to give you an idea. And that is really not enough to change an election outcome in most voting systems. So colleagues of mine, this is not research I have done, colleagues of mine in Austria and Germany have done really interesting research where they compared how good young people are at placing themselves on the political spectrum and then selecting a party or candidate that would best represent their views. And they do just as well as older adults. So if you think about sort of maturity or knowledge or information, all of these kinds of arguments, we have fairly robust evidence that 16 and 17-year-olds do just as well as older adults.
Nuurrianti, in your research, and just in your opinion, I'm interested, how do you see it? Do you think 16-year-olds should have the right to vote? I mean, there really are only 2 years between 16 and 18. There's been extensive research that say that a brain isn't fully developed in terms of logical thinking until they're 25. I see you shaking your head. Like, how would you respond to that?
I mean, I agree with all the points that were made by Thomas and Cameron. Like, I feel we need to really understand there's no significant difference between 16 and 18. And I'm coming, like, to give this perspective from Southeast Asia, more than half of the population in countries in our region is actually under 30. And by enfranchising younger voters can significantly shift what we call it electoral outcome. And we know that in Austria, as mentioned before, lowering the voting age to 16 has not only increased turnout, but also foster early voting habit for younger voters. And the quality of the voting, the votes have been put in is similar to people like age 18 and above. So I feel it's important for us to kind of understand that. And if we apply that to Southeast Asia, bringing in younger voters, understanding the context that half of us, right, more than half of the population is under 30. It's very positive development. However, this is something that we need to kind of also understand, because in Southeast Asia, we have what we call it weaker media information literacy curricula. So I think if we want to bring younger voters into, to vote, younger voters like 16 years old to vote, it needs to be accompanied by strong civic education and safeguard against manipulations.
Let me jump in then, Nuurrianti, because we're running out of time, and I just want to give the gentleman a last thought. Thomas, do you have a quick question and answer? Do you have a question for Cameron? They've achieved the 16 vote. You haven't yet. Any question to him? Any advice?
Yeah, so I guess the only thing that I'd ask is, how do you foresee this change positively affecting 16 and 17-year-olds for generations to come? Because when I look at how it could potentially play out in New Zealand, I feel quite disappointed, because a couple of years ago, we had a bill to lower the voting age for local elections that was ditched by the incoming government. So I guess, how does it feel, and how do you think this will positively benefit our generations to come?
Great question. And personally, I see that we will hopefully have better politicians, the likes of Jacinda Ardern, somebody who I admire very much, hopefully around the table, who will represent people of all ages. And I'm not arguing that young people are more important than anybody else. Although, like you said, Thomas, it is our world that we are to inherit. I think that the politicians, hopefully, that young people will opt to elect will represent them on lots more scales. And young people are involved in activism in New Zealand, in the UK, all across the world, but hopefully that activism will start to materialise into real action. A great example of this is literally just a few days ago, the UK and lots of other countries recognised Palestine as a now formal state. These sorts of historic actions and things that are happening will hopefully start to be a direct result of young people's activism and now active engagement in politics. And hopefully this decision will be mirrored in New Zealand and in lots more countries around the world. And we will see where the general election goes in the UK in a few years' time. And hopefully it will be a positive result.
Such an interesting discussion. Cameron, Thomas and Nuurrianti, thank you very much for joining us today. And thank you all for tuning in. Get in touch if you have a topic that's important to you and you would like us to discuss. This is also your show and we want to hear from you. Use the hashtag or the handle AJStream and we'll look into it. Bye for now and I'll see you soon.